Close your eyes for a moment and imagine walking through the ruins of an ancient marketplace. The stones beneath your feet once echoed with the calls of merchants, the clink of coins, the rustle of silk from distant lands. But now, silence. For nearly 1,000 years, an entire world of business simply vanished. Not destroyed in war, not lost to natural disaster, but erased so completely that even today, historians whisper about what they call the phantom millennium. Today, we're going to explore one of history's most intriguing mysteries. A time when ledgers turned to dust, when trade routes became forgotten paths, and when the very memory of how business was conducted seemed to simply slip away. So, settle in, let your breathing slow, and join me as we uncover the mystery of the Dark Ages. A story that asks the question, was 1,000 years of human enterprise truly erased? Or does something far more fascinating lie hidden in the shadows of history? The year is 476 CE. The last Roman emperor in the West has just stepped down, and with him, something unprecedented happens. The great ledgers of the empire simply stopped. For centuries, Roman scribes had meticulously recorded every transaction. Every bushel of grain shipped from Egypt, every amphora of wine from Gaul, every pound of silver mined in Spain. The Roman economy was a vast documented machine, breathing with the rhythm of recorded commerce. And then, silence. Imagine walking through Rome in the year 500. The Forum Romanum, once bustling with merchants from every corner of the known world, now echoes with emptiness. The great basilicas where business deals were struck, where contracts were sealed with wax and witnesses. They stand like sleeping giants, their purpose slowly fading from memory. But here's what makes this mystery so compelling, so perfectly suited for our drowsy contemplation tonight. The silence wasn't sudden. It was gradual, like watching ink fade from parchment in the gentle light of a setting sun. Trade didn't stop. People didn't stop needing bread or cloth or the simple tools of daily life. But somehow, the great machine of recorded business began to wind down, like a massive clock whose key had been misplaced. In monastery scriptoriums across Europe, monks bent over their desks by candlelight, but they weren't copying business contracts anymore. They were preserving religious texts, philosophical treatises, anything but the practical records of how goods moved from hand to hand. And so began what historians would later call the Dark Ages. Not dark because of violence or catastrophe, but dark because the light of written records had dimmed to barely a flicker. But was this really an erasure? Or was something else happening? Something that challenges everything we think we know about how business, how human enterprise, actually works. As you relax deeper into this story, let yourself wonder, what happens to knowledge when it's no longer written down? Does it disappear? Or does it transform into something else entirely? In the monasteries of Ireland, something curious was happening. While much of Europe seemed to forget how to record business transactions, Irish monks were developing one of the most sophisticated banking systems the world had ever seen. They weren't writing it down in ledgers. They were encoding it in memory, in song, in the very rhythm of monastic life. The abbot would rise before dawn, and in the soft light of morning prayers, he would mentally calculate which monastery needed grain, which had surplus wool, how many silver coins should accompany the next traveling monk to balance the books across an entire network of religious houses. No written records, no double-entry bookkeeping, just human memory, trained and honed until it could hold the complexity of an international business network. And this brings us to our first great question of the night, one that might follow you into your dreams. If business knowledge can survive without being written down, what other forms might it take? What other secrets might be hidden in the so-called Dark Ages? As we drift further into this mystery, let the sounds of that phantom marketplace fade into the distance, and prepare yourself for a journey that will challenge everything you thought you knew about the relationship between memory, commerce, and the very nature of how human beings organize their world. Now let me share with you one of the most extraordinary theories ever proposed about the Dark Ages. It sounds like something from a dream, and perhaps, as you listen, it will become part of yours. In 1991, a German historian named Herbert Illig proposed something that made the academic world hold its breath. What if, he asked, the year 614 to 911 CE never actually happened? Imagine that. Nearly 300 years of history, simply inserted into our timeline like pages accidentally bound into the wrong book. The business records weren't lost during those centuries, because those centuries never existed. Illig called it the phantom time hypothesis, and while most historians dismissed it, the questions it raises are perfect for our sleepy contemplation. Because whether or not those years were real, the theory illuminates something profound about the nature of recorded history and the mystery of vanished business knowledge. Picture yourself as a medieval chronicler, sitting in a candlelit scriptorium sometime around the year 1000. You read trying to piece together the history of the previous centuries, but something feels wrong. The records are fragmented, inconsistent, full of gaps that seem too convenient to be accidental. You find references to great markets that supposedly flourished in cities that show no archaeological evidence of prosperity. You discover mentions of trade agreements between kingdoms that, according to other sources, were supposedly at war. It's as if the business history of an entire era was fabricated. Now, let your mind drift with this possibility. What if the appearance of lost business knowledge wasn't actually loss at all, but rather the covering up of something that never existed in the first place? Whether Illig's theory is true or not, and you can let that question float gently through your consciousness as you relax, it points to something fascinating about the medieval period. The line between what actually happened and what was written down became increasingly blurred. In the courts of Charlemagne, scribes were tasked with creating a continuous narrative of European history, but they were working with fragments, pieces of a puzzle that had been scattered by time and circumstance. So, they did what any good storyteller would do. They filled in the gaps. Imagine those scribes, working by the light of oil lamps, their quills scratching across parchment as they invented business transactions to make the historical records seem complete. A trade agreement here, a merchant guild there, slowly weaving together a tapestry of commerce that may have existed more in imagination than in reality. And this brings us to a deeper mystery, one that's perfect for pondering. In medieval Europe, the distinction between fact and story wasn't as clear as it is today. Business knowledge was often preserved in the form of tales, legends, songs that contained practical information wrapped in memorable narratives. A traveling merchant might carry with him not a written ledger, but a collection of stories. Each tale contained crucial business intelligence: which roads were safe, which lords demanded tolls, which towns paid fair prices for salt or spices or wool. The merchant would arrive in a new town, and over dinner in the local tavern, he would tell his stories. To the casual listener, they sounded like entertainment. But to other merchants, they were detailed business reports, encoded in metaphor and memory. So perhaps the question isn't whether business knowledge was erased during the Dark Ages, but whether it was transformed into something we no longer recognize as business knowledge at all. As you let this idea settle in your mind, picture those medieval taverns where merchants gathered. The warmth of the fire, the low murmur of conversation, and beneath it all, a complex network of commercial intelligence being shared in the ancient language of story. In your relaxed state, you can almost hear those voices, carrying forward the accumulated wisdom of centuries of trade, not in ledgers that could be lost or burned, but in the unbreakable code of human memory and narrative. Let yourself wonder what other forms of knowledge might be hiding in plain sight, disguised as something entirely different. Let your imagination carry you to a hillside overlooking a medieval town. Below you, something extraordinary is taking place. Something that challenges everything we think we know about business in the Dark Ages. A cathedral is rising from the earth. Not quickly, as buildings rise today, but slowly, lovingly, across generations. And within this process lies one of the most sophisticated business networks in human history, hidden in plain sight. Picture the master mason arriving at dawn. He carries no written contracts, no detailed budgets, no project timelines. Yet he coordinates the work of hundreds of craftsmen, manages supply chains that span continents, and maintains financial records that would impress modern accountants. But how? How does this complex economy function without the business infrastructure we think is necessary? The answer lies in what medieval people called the cathedral economy, a system so elegant, so perfectly adapted to its time, that it operated almost invisibly for centuries. Let your mind drift with me into the Mason's Lodge, a wooden building beside the rising cathedral where the craftsmen gather each morning. Here, business knowledge is encoded in symbols carved into stone, in the precise angles of Gothic arches, in the sacred geometry that guides every decision. Each symbol tells a story. The depth of a carving indicates the quality of stone needed. The spacing of pillars reveals how many workers are required for each phase of construction. The height of a nave communicates the financial resources available from the local community. Imagine a traveling stonecutter arriving from another cathedral project. He needs no written resume, no letters of recommendation. The master mason simply looks at the tools he carries, examines the calluses on his hands, observes how he approaches a block of limestone. In minutes, the master knows everything. This man's skill level, his experience with different types of stone, even his moral character, revealed through the reverence with which he handles his tools. But the truly remarkable aspect of the cathedral economy wasn't just how knowledge was shared, it was how value was calculated. These builders created what we might call the first economy based on time rather than money. Consider this. A cathedral took generations to complete. The master mason who began the project would never see its completion. Neither would his apprentices or their apprentices. Yet somehow, the economic system remained stable across centuries. How do you maintain a business relationship that spans lifetimes? How do you ensure that debts are honored, that quality standards are maintained, that the vision remains consistent, when the people involved will age and die and be replaced by their children and grandchildren? The cathedral builders solved this through what they called the eternal ledger, a system of accounting that existed not in books, but in the stones themselves. Imagine yourself running your hand along the wall of a medieval cathedral. Each stone is perfectly cut, perfectly placed. But to the trained eye of a medieval mason, each stone also tells a financial story. This stone came from a quarry 40 miles north, transported by ox cart in the autumn when the rivers were low. That arch was completed during a year of good harvests when the townspeople could afford to increase their donations. Those windows were installed by craftsmen from the glass workshops of Chartres, paid for by a merchant guild that specialized in wool. The entire cathedral becomes a three-dimensional ledger, a permanent record of thousands of business transactions, encoded in limestone and oak and stained glass. And here's what makes this system so perfectly suited for our drowsy contemplation. It was designed to work even when people forgot the details. Even if the written records were lost, even if the specific knowledge of how things were done disappeared, the stones themselves would remember. A new generation of masons could arrive centuries later and read the building like a book. They could understand the economic system, the supply chains, the management structure, simply by observing how the cathedral was built. As you let this image settle in your mind, consider the profound wisdom of creating business systems that teach themselves to the next generation. Knowledge that doesn't need to be written down because it is embedded in the very structure of the work itself. In the soft light of evening, imagine those medieval craftsmen laying down their tools and walking home through narrow cobblestone streets. They carry with them no briefcases full of documents, no smartphones buzzing with urgent messages, just the quiet satisfaction of contributing to something that will outlast them by centuries. And in that satisfaction lies a secret about the nature of sustainable business, a secret that the so-called Dark Ages understood better than we do today. But what was that secret? And how did an entire civilization organize complex economic relationships without the business tools we consider essential? Allow your breathing to slow even further as we enter the shadowy world of medieval guilds. These weren't just simple trade associations. They were secret societies that preserved the most sophisticated business knowledge of their age, hidden in plain sight. Picture yourself standing before the heavy wooden door of a guild hall, somewhere in medieval Bruges or Venice or London. The door is carved with intricate symbols, patterns that seem decorative to the casual observer, but which actually form a complex business code that members spend years learning to read. Each symbol tells a story about trade routes, quality standards, pricing agreements, and the intricate network of trust that held the medieval economy together. As you imagine pushing open that heavy door, step into a world where business knowledge was so valuable, so carefully protected, that revealing trade secrets was punishable by exile or death. The guild system represents one of history's most successful examples of what we might call distributed business intelligence. No single person held all the knowledge, but the community as a whole possessed wisdom that spanned continents and centuries. Imagine a young apprentice, perhaps 13 years old, standing nervously in the center of the guild hall. He is about to begin a 7-year journey that will transform him from a boy who knows nothing about his craft into a master who carries within his mind and hands the accumulated wisdom of generations. But here's what makes this process so fascinating for our sleepy contemplation. The apprentice isn't learning from textbooks or manuals. He's absorbing knowledge through ritual, through repetition, through stories that embed practical information in memorable narratives. Let your mind drift with the rhythm of the apprentice's days. Before dawn, he rises and tends the workshop fires. As he works, the other craftsmen tell stories, tales of legendary masters who could identify the origin of any piece of wool by touch, who knew the secret of creating dyes that would never fade, who understood the hidden patterns that governed fair pricing in markets across Europe. Each story contains layers of meaning. On the surface, they're entertainment, exciting tales of adventure and discovery. But beneath the narrative lies practical business intelligence. Which ports to avoid during storm season, how to detect counterfeit currency, the proper ratio of tin to copper for bronze that will hold its edge for decades. As the years pass, the apprentice begins to understand that he's not just learning a craft. He's being initiated into an ancient system of commerce that operates on principles invisible to outsiders. Consider the profound wisdom of this approach as you relax deeper. In our modern world, we often think of business knowledge as information that can be quickly transmitted, learned from books or videos or brief explanations. But the guilds understood something we've forgotten. The most valuable business knowledge is not information at all. It's judgment. And judgment can only be developed through experience, through the slow accumulation of countless small lessons, through what the masters called the education of the hand and heart together. Picture the guild master watching his apprentice work. He doesn't correct every mistake immediately. Instead, he waits, allows the young man to discover for himself how different types of wood respond to different tools, how the grain of the wood tells the story of the tree's life, how that story must guide every business decision about which wood to buy, how much to pay, how to use it most effectively. This is knowledge that cannot be written down, cannot be reduced to formulas or procedures. It lives in the craftsman's hands, in his ability to read the subtle signs that determine whether a piece of work will last for decades or fail within months. And here's where the guild system reveals its true genius. By the time an apprentice becomes a master, by the time he's permitted to establish his own workshop and take on his own apprentices, he carries within himself not just technical knowledge, but the accumulated business wisdom of his entire lineage. He knows which suppliers his master trusted and why. He understands the seasonal rhythms of his trade, when to buy raw materials, when to focus on production, when to travel to markets. He has internalized the intricate social networks that make complex transactions possible across vast distances without written contracts or legal enforcement. Most remarkably, he's learned to read people, to assess character and competence and trustworthiness through subtle cues that no manual could ever capture. As you let this image settle in your mind, imagine the profound security this system provided. Even if workshops were destroyed, even if written records were lost, even if entire cities were abandoned, the knowledge survived because it lived in human beings. But the guilds protected their secrets through more than just oral tradition. They developed what historians now call the architecture of knowledge, physical spaces designed to preserve and transmit business wisdom across generations. The layout of a guild workshop wasn't random. Every tool had its designated place, not just for efficiency, but because the arrangement itself taught lessons about the proper sequence of operations, about the relationships between different aspects of the craft, about the business principles that govern successful production. A new apprentice could learn simply by observing where things were kept, how the space was organized, how the masters moved through their daily routines. And in the guild halls themselves, in those magnificent buildings that still grace the centers of European cities, business knowledge was literally built into the walls. The carved decorations weren't merely ornamental. They were textbooks, teaching the principles of trade through symbol and story. The proportions of the rooms followed mathematical principles that governed everything from currency exchange to fair pricing to the optimization of shipping routes. Let yourself wonder, what would it feel like to work in a system where your daily activities were guided by centuries of accumulated wisdom, where every gesture connected you to a vast network of knowledge and tradition? In the guilds, business wasn't separate from life. It was woven into the very fabric of community existence. And perhaps that integration holds a key to understanding how an entire civilization could thrive, could create, could innovate, without leaving behind a kind of written business records we expect to find. Let your mind travel eastward, across mountains and deserts, to one of the most remarkable business networks in human history, the Silk Road, where fortunes were made and lost without a single written contract, where trust was the only currency that mattered. Picture yourself in a caravanserai, one of those fortress-like inns that dotted the trade routes between Europe and Asia. The year is somewhere in the 8th century, deep in what we call the Dark Ages. Yet around you swirl a complexity of international commerce that wouldn't be matched again for centuries. Persian merchants negotiate with Chinese silk dealers using gestures and smiles, their words lost in the babble of a dozen languages. Yet somehow, agreements are reached, partnerships are formed, and goods worth emperors' ransoms change hands on nothing more than reputation and honor. How does such a system work? How do you build trust with someone whose language you don't speak, whose customs you don't understand, whose home lies months of dangerous travel away? The answer lies in what Silk Road merchants called the invisible ledger, a system of record-keeping that existed not in books, but in the intricate web of relationships that connected traders across continents. Imagine yourself as a merchant from Venice, carrying a cargo of wool and glass, arriving in Samarkand after months of travel. You've never been here before. You know no one. Yet within hours of your arrival, you're invited to dine with the city's most respected traders. How? Because word of your character has preceded you, passed from merchant to merchant along the trade routes, encoded in a system of reputation that was more reliable than any written record. Let your mind drift with this remarkable process. In Constantinople, a silk merchant mentions to his cousin that he met an honest Venetian trader. The cousin mentions this to a spice dealer he trusts. The spice dealer shares the information with a caravan master who's planning a journey to Samarkand. By the time you arrive in Samarkand, months later, your reputation has arrived before you. Not recorded in any document, not written in any ledger, but preserved in the most durable storage medium of all, human memory and the bonds of mutual benefit. This network of invisible records was so sophisticated that a merchant's credibility could be traced across thousands of miles, verified through dozens of intermediaries, without a single piece of paper changing hands. But the Silk Road's business system went far beyond reputation management. These merchants developed what might have been the world's first truly global economy, complete with standardized quality measures, currency exchange rates, and risk management strategies that would impress modern financiers. Consider this. A bolt of Chinese silk might be purchased by a Persian merchant, transported by Mongol caravan masters, traded to Arab dealers in Damascus, and finally sold to European buyers in Venice. The entire transaction might take 2 years to complete, involving dozens of intermediaries, crossing multiple empires, subject to wars, natural disasters, and the countless unpredictable hazards of medieval travel. Yet somehow, the system worked. Goods flowed, profits were shared, and the complex calculations of cost, risk, and reward were managed without the business infrastructure we consider essential today. The secret lay in what the merchants called the rhythm of trust. Like the rhythm of breathing, like the rhythm of walking, trust had to be maintained through constant small actions rather than dramatic gestures. Picture a merchant caravan resting for the night beside an oasis. As the merchants share their evening meal, they're also sharing information. Not dramatic secrets, but small, practical details that help maintain the invisible network of trust. Which routes are safe and which aren't. Which local officials expect gifts and which ones are scrupulously honest. Which goods are in demand, which markets are oversupplied. Where currency is stable and where it's fluctuating. Each piece of information is a gift, freely given, that strengthens the bonds of mutual dependence. Because on the Silk Road, hoarding information was economically suicidal. Your survival depended on the goodwill of people you might never see again. And so, the merchants developed an economic philosophy that seems almost magical from our modern perspective. The more you gave away, the more you received in return. But perhaps the most remarkable aspect of the Silk Road system was how it handled what we would call intellectual property. The secrets of silk production, the formulas for precious dyes, the knowledge of which mountain passes remained open in winter. This information was incredibly valuable. Yet, rather than hoarding these secrets, the most successful merchants shared them strategically, creating webs of mutual obligation that were more valuable than any individual piece of knowledge. Imagine a Chinese silk producer teaching a Persian merchant the subtle signs that distinguish high-quality silk from inferior grades. He's giving away valuable knowledge, but in return, he gains a trading partner who will never sell him inferior goods, who will protect his reputation in distant markets, who becomes an extension of his own business network. This philosophy created something unprecedented in human history, a truly international business culture that transcended political boundaries, religious differences, and linguistic barriers. A Buddhist merchant from China could do business with a Muslim trader from Baghdad, who could partner with a Christian merchant from Venice. Not because they shared common beliefs, but because they shared common business principles based on reciprocal trust and mutual benefit. As you let this image settle in your relaxed mind, consider the profound wisdom of building business relationships that enhance everyone involved rather than zero-sum competitions. where one person's gain requires another's loss. So, what other forms of sophisticated business knowledge might be hidden in the so-called Dark Ages, disguised as something we don't recognize as commerce at all? What if the most successful economic system of the early medieval period was based not on competition, not on profit maximization, not on individual advantage, but on strategic generosity? Picture yourself in the great hall of a medieval lord, somewhere in the misty highlands of Scotland or the green valleys of Ireland. The year is perhaps 600 CE, deep in the heart of what historians call the Dark Ages. Yet around you unfold an economy of breathtaking sophistication. The Lord sits at the head of a long wooden table, but he's not counting gold or reviewing ledgers. Instead, he's engaged in the most complex business calculations of his age, determining not how much to take, but how much to give away. This is the gift economy, a system so alien to our modern thinking that most people today can't even imagine how it could work. Yet for centuries, it was the dominant form of business organization across much of Europe. Let your imagination follow the logic of strategic gift-giving. The Lord has just received a shipment of fine wool from his tenant farmers. Instead of selling it for the highest price, instead of hoarding it for his own use, he does something that seems economically irrational. He gives it away. But watch carefully as this gift travels through the community. The Lord gives the wool to the local monastery, not out of pure charity, but as a carefully calculated business investment. The monks use the wool to make warm cloaks, which they give to traveling pilgrims. Those pilgrims carry word of the monastery's hospitality to distant lands. Other pilgrims begin to seek out this particular monastery, bringing with them stories, knowledge, and connections from across the known world. Soon, the monastery becomes a center of information exchange, a medieval equivalent of a business intelligence network. And the Lord, the original giver of the wool, finds himself with access to knowledge that's worth far more than the original gift. He learns which regions are experiencing poor harvests, where demand for grain will be highest next season. He discovers which lords are planning wars, which territories will need to import weapons and supplies. He gains access to a network of relationships that spans continents, all because he understood the fundamental principle of the gift economy. Wealth circulates best when it's flowing, not when it's hoarded. As you rest in this understanding, consider how different this is from our modern business thinking. Today, we're taught that successful business requires careful calculation of profit margins, precise measurement of return on investment, detailed analysis of costs and benefits. But the gift economy operated on a different principle entirely. The most successful practitioners didn't calculate returns. They cultivated relationships. They didn't maximize short-term profits. They optimized long-term network effects. Imagine yourself as a medieval merchant operating within the system. You arrive in a new town with a cart full of goods. But instead of immediately setting up shop to sell them, you begin by giving gifts. A fine knife to the blacksmith, a bolt of cloth to the mayor's wife, a silver pin to the local priest. Each gift is carefully chosen, not just for its material value, but for its symbolic meaning and its potential to create ongoing relationships. The blacksmith doesn't just accept your knife. He accepts an obligation to provide you with his services when you need them. The mayor's wife becomes an advocate for your interests in local political discussions. The priest mentions your generosity in his sermons, enhancing your reputation throughout the community. By the time you're ready to conduct actual trade, you're no longer a stranger seeking profit. You're a valued member of the community's network, someone whose success benefits everyone. But the gift economy's sophistication went far beyond simple relationship building. These medieval communities developed what we might call distributed wealth management systems that were remarkably resilient and adaptive. Picture a village facing a harsh winter. Modern economic theory would suggest that those with surplus should sell to those in need, allowing market forces to determine fair prices based on supply and demand. But the gift economy worked differently. Those with surplus gave to those in need, not out of charity, but as an investment in the community's overall resilience. Because they understood something we often forget. In small, interconnected communities, everyone's survival is linked. If the miller's family starves during the winter, there will be no one to grind grain come spring. If the blacksmith's children become malnourished, the entire community loses access to essential services. If the healer cannot gather sufficient herbs because she spent all her time searching for food, everyone's health becomes vulnerable. And so, the gift economy optimized not for individual profit, but for systemic stability and community resilience. This approach created business networks that were almost impossible to destroy, because wealth was distributed rather than concentrated, because relationships were more important than resources, because the system was designed to strengthen itself through circulation rather than accumulation. These communities could survive disasters that would devastate market-based economies. If a lord's castle was destroyed in war, he didn't become poor overnight. Instead, the web of relationships he had built through years of strategic giving became his safety net. Other lords who had benefited from his generosity now competed to offer him shelter, resources, opportunities to rebuild. The gift economy had essentially distributed risk across the entire network, making the whole system more stable than any individual part. But perhaps the most remarkable aspect of this system was how it handled innovation and knowledge sharing. In a market economy, new ideas are often protected as trade secrets, hidden from competitors to maintain advantage. In the gift economy, sharing knowledge was the fastest way to increase your status and influence. A master craftsman who discovered a new technique didn't patent it or sell it. He gave it away, knowing that his generosity would enhance his reputation and create obligations that would benefit him for years to come. This created an environment where innovation spread rapidly throughout the community, where the collective knowledge of the group advanced much faster than it could have under competitive hoarding. Imagine what it would feel like to live and work in such a system, where your success was measured not by how much you accumulated, but by how much you contributed, where business relationships were built on genuine care for others' well-being, because their well-being was directly connected to your own. And as we prepare to explore our next mystery, let yourself wonder, could such a system work today? Or have we lost something essential, some understanding of human nature and community that made the gift economy possible? Let your mind wander to one of the most overlooked repositories of business knowledge in the medieval world. Not libraries, not ledgers, but kitchens, where the secrets of international commerce were preserved in something as simple and as essential as recipes. Picture yourself entering a monastery kitchen in the year 800. The air is thick with the scent of herbs and spices, some familiar, others exotic and mysterious. The monks move with practiced efficiency, grinding, mixing, stirring, following formulas that have been passed down through generations. But these aren't just recipes for food. They're encoded business manuals, containing information about trade routes, seasonal patterns, quality standards, and the intricate networks of supply and demand that connected medieval Europe to the far corners of the known world. Consider the profound wisdom of preserving knowledge in this form. A recipe for spiced wine doesn't look like a business document, but to someone who knows how to read it, it reveals everything. Which spices are available, which trade routes are functioning, which merchants can be trusted to provide consistent quality. Let your imagination follow a recipe for what the monks called pilgrim's comfort, a warming drink served to travelers. The recipe calls for cinnamon from Ceylon, black pepper from India, ginger from China, honey from local hives, and wine from specific vineyards in France. To prepare this drink properly, a monk needs to understand the seasonal availability of each ingredient, the quality variations between different suppliers, the optimal storage methods for preserving potency over long periods, and the complex web of relationships required to maintain steady supplies of exotic materials. In effect, the recipe is a compressed business manual, encoding centuries of accumulated knowledge about international trade in a form that can be memorized, shared, and preserved without written documentation. But the kitchen archives went far deeper than simple ingredient sourcing. Medieval cooks developed what we might call metabolic business intelligence, understanding how different foods affected human performance, mood, and decision-making ability. Picture a medieval lord preparing for an important negotiation. His cook doesn't just prepare any meal. She carefully selects foods that will enhance mental clarity, reduce anxiety, and promote the kind of calm confidence that leads to successful business dealings. Certain herbs to sharpen focus, specific combinations of proteins and grains to maintain steady energy, particular spices known to promote feelings of goodwill and cooperation. The meal itself becomes a business tool, as carefully crafted as any modern presentation or negotiation strategy. And this knowledge was preserved not in medical texts or business manuals, but in recipes that could be shared casually, taught to children, passed from cook to cook without arousing suspicion or competition. As you relax deeper into this story, consider how brilliant this preservation system was. Religious and political authorities might ban books, burn libraries, suppress written records, but they would never think to prohibit cooking or to view recipes as subversive documents. The kitchen became a perfect hiding place for business intelligence, protected by its apparent innocence and its essential daily function. Imagine a traveling merchant arriving at a monastery. Over dinner, he mentions to the cook that he's been having trouble finding reliable suppliers of saffron. The cook nods sympathetically and offers to share a recipe for golden celebration bread, which just happens to include detailed information about which dealers can be trusted, which grades of saffron to avoid, and the optimal times of year for purchasing. The information is transmitted seamlessly, embedded in a conversation about food that anyone overhearing would dismiss as kitchen gossip. But the culinary preservation system extended beyond simple trade intelligence. Medieval cooks developed sophisticated understanding of what we might call psychological cuisine, using food to influence business outcomes in subtle but powerful ways. Different regions developed signature approaches to business entertaining. In Italy, meals were designed to promote animated discussion and creative thinking. In Germanic regions, the focus was on foods that encouraged careful deliberation and methodical planning. In Celtic areas, feasts were crafted to build emotional bonds and long-term loyalty. Each approach encoded deep understanding of how food affects human psychology, and how skilled hosts could use this knowledge to create optimal conditions for different types of business relationships. A merchant guild planning a delicate negotiation might spend days planning the menu, not just for hospitality, but as a strategic element of the business process itself. The morning meal might feature foods that promote alertness and analytical thinking to ensure clear discussion of complex terms. The midday break can include ingredients known to reduce stress and promote flexibility, helping negotiators find creative solutions to difficult problems. The evening feast would emphasize foods that build feelings of warmth and mutual trust, sealing agreements with genuine goodwill. And all of this knowledge was preserved in recipes that looked completely innocent, that could be shared openly, that seemed to have nothing to do with business at all. But perhaps the most remarkable aspect of the culinary archive system was how it preserved knowledge about seasonal business cycles. Medieval commerce was intimately connected to natural rhythms, the timing of harvests, the patterns of weather, the migration routes of animals. This knowledge was encoded in the annual cycle of festival foods, special dishes, prepared only at certain times of year, recipes that taught when specific goods would be available, when demand would peak, when travel would be most feasible. The recipe for harvest moon cakes prepared only in late September, encoded information about when grain prices reached their lowest point, when wool quality was at its peak, when the roads would still be passable before winter rains made travel dangerous. The Christmas pudding tradition, with its complex mixture of exotic spices and dried fruits, preserved knowledge about which trade routes remained open during winter months, which goods could be safely stored for long periods, which merchants maintained reliable service even during the most challenging season. Each festival, each seasonal recipe became a mnemonic device, helping medieval business people remember the complex timing that governed successful commerce in an age without written calendars or detailed weather forecasting. As you let this understanding settle in your relaxed mind, picture those monastery kitchens as vast libraries, their recipes serving as index cards in a filing system that preserve the accumulated business wisdom of centuries, knowledge that might have been lost forever if it had been written in ledgers or business manuals survived because it was embedded in the daily practice of preparing food, in traditions so fundamental to human life that they could never be completely erased. Now, let us uncover the most remarkable preservation system of all, and discover how the apparent erasure of business knowledge might actually have been its transformation into something far more durable than any written record. Let your mind drift to the flickering light of a great hall, where shadows dance on stone walls and the air thrums with the ancient power of spoken words. Here, in the realm of the traveling bards, we discover perhaps the most sophisticated knowledge preservation system ever created. Picture yourself listening to a master storyteller, his voice rising and falling with practiced rhythm, his words painting vivid pictures of heroes and adventures. But listen more carefully. Beneath the surface narrative lies something far more complex, an intricate encoding of business knowledge that would make modern data scientists marvel. The tale he tells speaks of a brave knight who must cross 7 kingdoms to rescue a princess, but to the trained listener, this is actually a detailed manual for conducting international trade. Each kingdom represents a different market. Each challenge the hero faces corresponds to a specific business obstacle. Each magical solution reveals time-tested strategies for overcoming commercial difficulties. This is the art of the memory keepers, those remarkable individuals who preserve the accumulated business wisdom of civilizations in the most durable storage medium ever discovered: human memory enhanced by story. Let your imagination follow the bardic training process. A young apprentice spends years learning not just to memorize stories, but to understand the complex layered meanings embedded within each tale. A single epic poem might contain information about seasonal trade patterns, diplomatic protocols, currency exchange rates, quality standards for dozens of different goods, and the character assessments of hundreds of merchants and officials across the known world. But here's what makes this system so perfectly suited for our drowsy contemplation. The bards didn't just memorize information. They transformed it into something that enhanced itself each time it was shared. Each telling of a story was an opportunity to update the information, to incorporate new intelligence, to refine the knowledge based on recent experience. The stories evolved, growing more accurate and more useful with each generation of storytellers. Imagine a bard arriving in a distant town, gathering the local merchants and traders for an evening's entertainment. As he tells his tales, he's also conducting research, listening for subtle reactions that reveal which parts of his information are outdated, which new challenges have emerged, which opportunities his stories haven't yet captured. By the end of the evening, he knows exactly how to update his repertoire. The next time he tells these tales, they'll be more accurate, more useful, more perfectly adapted to current conditions. This created a living business intelligence network that spanned continents, with bards serving as both data collectors and information distributors, constantly refining and updating their knowledge base through the simple act of telling stories. But the bardic system went far beyond information sharing. These storytellers developed what we might call psychological business modeling, understanding how different personality types responded to various narrative approaches. A bard approaching a cautious, analytical merchant would tell stories that emphasize careful planning and methodical execution. For an impulsive, intuitive trader, the same business advice would be embedded in tales of bold adventure and inspired risk-taking. The information remained the same, but its presentation was perfectly customized to match the listener's psychological profile, ensuring maximum understanding and retention. This level of personalization was possible because bards were trained to read people with extraordinary subtlety. They could assess character, intelligence, motivation, and learning style within minutes of meeting someone, then adjust their storytelling approach accordingly. In effect, each bardic performance was a customized business consultation, with the consultant possessing access to the accumulated wisdom of centuries of commercial experience. But perhaps the most remarkable aspect of the bardic preservation system was how it handled what we might call strategic ambiguity. Some business knowledge was too sensitive to share openly, too valuable to risk falling into the wrong hands. The bards developed sophisticated encoding techniques, layering their stories with multiple levels of meaning. Surface listeners heard entertaining tales. Merchants recognized practical business advice. Guild masters perceived deeper strategic intelligence. And the most initiated could decode information about political movements, military preparations, and other highly sensitive matters. The same story could simultaneously serve as entertainment for children, business intelligence for traders, political briefing for nobles, and strategic planning document for military leaders. This multi-layered encoding meant that knowledge could be shared publicly without compromising security, transmitted across hostile territories without attracting unwanted attention, and preserved through periods of political upheaval when written records might be destroyed or suppressed. As you relax into this understanding, picture the profound security this system provided. A traveling bard carried no suspicious documents, no obvious treasure, nothing that would attract bandits or border guards. Yet within his memory lay intelligence worth more than gold, business knowledge that could make or break fortunes, strategic information that could determine the fate of kingdoms. And this treasure was perfectly protected because it existed in a form that was simultaneously completely obvious and completely invisible. The bardic tradition also solved one of the fundamental problems of knowledge preservation: how to maintain accuracy across generations while allowing for necessary updates and adaptations. Written records, once created, tend to become fixed, resistant to change even when circumstances require it. But spoken traditions could evolve, incorporating new information while maintaining their essential core. The bards developed elaborate internal cross-checking systems, with master storytellers regularly gathering to compare versions of their tales, identifying where different regional variations had emerged, determining which changes represented useful adaptations and which were corruptions to be corrected. This created a self-correcting knowledge base, more resilient and adaptable than any written archive. But the most profound aspect of the bardic system was philosophical. These memory keepers understood that knowledge isn't just information. It is wisdom embedded in experience and refined through human understanding. They recognized that the most valuable business insights couldn't be reduced to formulas or procedures, that true commercial wisdom required judgment, intuition, and the ability to read complex human situations. And so, they preserved not just facts, but the accumulated emotional intelligence of generations of successful merchants, the hard-won understanding of human nature that enables effective business relationships, the subtle insights that distinguish merely clever traders from truly wise commercial leaders. Imagine what it would be like to have access to such a repository of wisdom, to consult with storytellers who carried within their memories the business insights of centuries, who could provide guidance not just about markets and methods, but about the deeper principles that govern successful human enterprise. What if the apparent erasure of business knowledge wasn't a loss at all, but the most sophisticated preservation strategy in human history? Picture yourself standing in a vast library, not one built of stone and filled with books, but a living library made of human consciousness, where knowledge flows like rivers through interconnected communities, where wisdom grows stronger rather than weaker as it passes from person to person. This is what the Dark Ages actually created. Not a collapse of business knowledge, but its evolution into something far more resilient, far more adaptive, far more deeply integrated into human life than any written system could ever be. Let your mind drift back through all the preservation systems we've explored tonight. The cathedral builders who encoded business knowledge in stone, the guilds who embedded wisdom in ritual and tradition, the Silk Road merchants who created networks of trust spanning continents, the gift economy communities who understood that true wealth flows rather than accumulates, the monastic kitchens where recipes preserved international trade intelligence, the memory keepers who transformed business wisdom into unforgettable stories. Each of these wasn't a primitive substitute for real business records. Each was a sophisticated response to a fundamental question. How do you preserve knowledge in a way that makes it stronger rather than weaker over time? Modern business operates on the assumption that knowledge is property, something to be owned, controlled, and protected from competitors. But the medieval world discovered something profound. Knowledge that is shared strategically becomes more valuable, not less. Consider the wisdom embedded in this approach. When knowledge is written down, it becomes fixed, vulnerable to loss or destruction, dependent on external systems for preservation and interpretation. But when knowledge is integrated into daily practice, when it's embedded in relationships and traditions, when it's encoded in stories and rituals that people actively want to preserve, it becomes virtually indestructible. The Dark Ages didn't lose business knowledge. They transformed it from brittle, external records into resilient, living wisdom that could adapt to changing circumstances while maintaining its essential truths. And this transformation reveals something profound about the nature of sustainable business itself. The medieval systems we've explored tonight weren't just preservation strategies. They were business models based on principles that modern commerce has largely forgotten. The principle that long-term relationships are more valuable than short-term profits. The understanding that sharing knowledge creates more wealth than hoarding it. The recognition that business thrives when it's integrated into community life rather than separated from it. The insight that trust is the most efficient business technology ever invented, requiring no infrastructure, no maintenance, no external support, yet enabling complex transactions across vast distances and cultural differences. These are primitive concepts that we've evolved beyond. They're sophisticated insights that we've forgotten, principles that could revolutionize modern business if we had the wisdom to rediscover them. As you float in this understanding, imagine what business might look like if we applied these medieval insights to our contemporary challenges. What if companies focused on building trust networks rather than accumulating capital? What if business education emphasized relationship building and community integration rather than competition and market domination? What if we measured success not just by profit margins, but by the resilience and adaptability of the business ecosystems we create? What if we designed organizations that become stronger and more valuable as they share knowledge rather than weaker? The Dark Ages offer us a blueprint for business systems that are simultaneously more humane and more effective than what we've built today. But perhaps the most profound lesson of our journey tonight is about the nature of knowledge itself. The medieval world understood something we're only beginning to rediscover. The most valuable knowledge isn't information that can be quickly transmitted. It's wisdom that must be slowly cultivated. The guild apprentice who spent 7 years learning his craft wasn't just acquiring technical skills. He was developing judgment, intuition, the ability to read complex situations and respond appropriately. This kind of knowledge can't be downloaded or transferred. It must be grown through experience and relationship. And this reveals why the Dark Ages preservation systems were so sophisticated. They weren't trying to preserve information. They were cultivating wisdom. They weren't maintaining databases. They were nurturing human capacity for sound business judgment. In our age of instant information and rapid technological change, perhaps we need to rediscover the medieval understanding that true business knowledge isn't something you have. It's something you become. The master craftsman, the trusted merchant, the wise guild leader. These weren't people who possessed business knowledge. They were people who had been shaped by it, transformed by years of practice into living repositories of commercial wisdom. And this transformation is what the Dark Ages truly preserved. Not ledgers or contracts or procedural manuals, but the human capacity for business wisdom itself. They understood that knowledge encoded in human character and relationship is the most durable form of preservation, because it automatically adapts to new circumstances while maintaining its essential principles. As you rest in this revelation, let yourself feel the profound continuity that connects us to those medieval business practitioners. The same human needs for trust, relationship, and meaningful work that drove their innovations continue to drive ours. The same challenges of coordinating complex activities across vast distances, of managing risk and uncertainty, of building sustainable prosperity, these continue to shape business today, just as they shaped it 1,000 years ago. And perhaps this is the greatest gift the Dark Ages offer us, the recognition that beneath all the technological complexity of modern business, beneath all the sophisticated systems and procedures we've developed, the fundamental principles of successful enterprise remain unchanged. Trust still matters more than contracts. Relationships still create more value than resources. Character still determines success more than cleverness. The Dark Ages weren't dark because knowledge was lost. They were dark because this knowledge was hidden, encoded in forms we no longer recognize, preserved in ways we've forgotten how to read. But tonight, in the gentle darkness of your relaxation, you've learned to see with medieval eyes. You've discovered the hidden business wisdom that connects us across centuries, the timeless principles that guide human enterprise, the profound understanding that true wealth is always relational rather than material. As our journey together draws to a close, as you rest in the deepest state of peaceful relaxation, let yourself carry forward the profound understanding we've discovered tonight. The Dark Ages weren't a time when business knowledge was erased. They were a time when it was transformed, encoded in stone and story, preserved in relationship and ritual, embedded so deeply in human culture that it became virtually indestructible. And perhaps this transformation holds a message for us today. In our age of rapid change and constant uncertainty, perhaps we too need to learn the medieval arts of knowledge preservation. Not just storing information in databases, but cultivating wisdom in human hearts. Not just building efficient systems, but nurturing resilient relationships. Not just maximizing short-term returns, but creating value that endures across generations. The eternal ledger that medieval business practitioners created was written in ink that could fade or stored in books that could burn. It was inscribed in the very fabric of human community, in the trust between trading partners, in the wisdom passed from master to apprentice, in the stories that preserve essential truths. And this ledger is still being written today, every time someone chooses relationship over transaction, every time someone shares knowledge rather than hoarding it, every time someone builds business on the foundation of trust and mutual benefit. As you carry with you the wisdom of the ages, remember that you too are part of this eternal ledger. Your choices, your relationships, your approach to business and life, these become part of the great preservation system that connects us across time. The Dark Ages were illuminated by the enduring light of human wisdom, the same light that guides us still, if we remember how to see it. True business wisdom, like all real wealth, is never lost, only transformed, only waiting to be rediscovered by those who know how to look.